Next, any factual matrix may fall in more than one of these clauses. There may be overlapping. More than one clause may apply to a specific case. However, learned AO may specify one or may specify more of that, and it may be covered. But just to say that these are specific charges to it, and he has to specify all, that is to read too much into it. But yes, these clauses are overlapping in nature. Regarding the overall concept of misreporting of income, one more thing I want to say is this: unless and until there is difference in assessed income and returned income, for the sake of ease, I would take these two amounts as assessed in processed income as difference. Although I've discussed the cases a while ago in these scenarios. So, in order to levy penalty, even in case of misreporting of income, there has to be some addition or disallowance which leads to difference between income assessed and income processed or income returned. That I'm saying for the reason that until and unless there is underreported income, which we saw computation in subsection 3, until and unless there is unreported income, even though in a factual matrix the act of the SSC may be categorized as misreporting, but if there is no underreported income, penalty cannot be levied. Now I've come to the specific clauses. Clause 1. Or suppression of facts. Reading this clause, the first thing that came to my mind was it is almost akin to the charges. Misrepresentation of facts is kind of furnishing inaccurate, and suppression of facts is kind of something you withhold, concealment of facts. This is almost kind of akin to those earlier concepts. Now, very interestingly, I present a situation where there is rank misrepresentation. However, I would argue that there would be no penalty under section 270A. Now,
प्रोडक्ट्स की अंतरराष्ट्रीय स्तर पर भी और स्वीकारता बढ़ेगी और इससे हमारे दूध उत्पादन में उसमें भी बढ़ोतरी होगी और पशुओं को भी एक अच्छा जीवन जीने का अवसर मिलेगा।
प्लीज इसको ऑफ
Am I audible, sir? So, as I was saying, I'll take an example. Now, let's assume a company has given advance to its shareholder holding more than 10%, and the company has accumulated more than accumulated profits to make that advance, or to say that advances out of those accumulated profits. In that case, to prevent or to get out of the clutches of 222 subclause E, that is deemed dividend, the company, the SSC, camouflages the transaction to show as advance for commercial expediency. During the course of assessment, assessing officer investigates, adjudicates, asks you, okay, tell me what is your commercial expediency, give your evidences, and comes to the conclusion that no, it is all a facade, and there is no commercial expediency, and applies the provision of 222 subclause E. But in case of 222E, the addition to be made in the hands of the shareholder, and despite rank misrepresentation on the end of the company SSC, there is no addition in the hands of the SSC company. There is no addition in the assessment. So there is no difference between the returned processed income and the assessed income. And therefore, since there is no underreported income, there is no case of levy of penalty under section 270 capital A. Another example, if I give, I'll just quickly touch upon the clause F. The clause F says where the SSC fails to report any international transaction or any domestic transaction under the provisions of chapter 10. So here is a case where SSC altogether fails to declare In defense, we read declare, disclose, and maintain documents. Here, if you completely fail to declare, it is a case of misreporting. But in case I fail to declare, and during the assessment, the assessing officer finds it out, the transfer pricing officer makes the study, and while working out the study, there is no adjustment. The transaction in any case is at arm's length price. Then again, when there is no adjustment, even if I have made the SSC's act has been of misreporting of income, of failure to disclose this transaction, declare this transaction. But since there is no adjustment, no addition, there is no underreported income. Sir, clause B. Now, very interestingly, this clause, failure to record investments in the books of account. We all are aware, as soon as we read these lines, failure to record investments, the first thing that comes to our mind is this is a case of addition under section 69 to 69 ABCD. To my mind, any amount which is an investment which has not been recorded in the books of accounts would go in section 68, 69, 69D up to 69D. These additions fall there. And you may recall, in December 2016, Taxation Laws Second Amendment Act was brought, wherein Section 271 AAC was introduced, which provided that additions made under Section 69D would be visited by penalty under Section 271 AAC. You may all remember 115 BBE, the tax rate was doubled to 60%, and another penalty of 10% was provided under section 271 AAC. And proviso was also given there that where addition is under 68 to 69D, provisions of 270A will not apply. So to our mind, this clause is more or less irrelevant. However, it is a case of omission because this was brought in the statute by Finance Act 2016. And this amendment of 271 AAC was brought in December 2016. So this is more of a case of omission. And as far as these additions are concerned, they would be attracted by penalty under section 271 AAC. Clause C, where the claim of expenditure is not substantiated by any evidence. If the assessee, say, claims commission expenditure, when the assessing officer asks, all right, please prove the expenditure, the assessee fails to provide any evidence to it, does not provide any invoice or anything. In that case, when the disallowance is made, it would be treated as a case of misreporting of income and would attract 200% of penalty of tax payable on underreported income. However, now say I have an eligible unit. The assessee eligible unit has exemption, and even if disallowance is made, I am not able to prove expenditure, but I have an exemption available. Even if the income is enhanced, there is no enhancement in assessed income. And when there is no enhancement in assessed income, there is no underreported income. In that case, there is no case of penalty under section 270 capital A. This can be even advanced, say for example, capital gain case, capital exemption also in respect of 54B, 54, 54F exemption provisions. And for example, while computing, assessing officer finds no cost of improvement to this extent is not allowable, it has to be disallowed, and makes some enhancement in the capital gain liable to tax. However, if I have the exemption, the deduction available under 54 to cover that disallowance also, to cover that enhanced capital gain, in that case also there is no difference created in the assessed income and the processed income. And therefore, there is no case of penalty under section 70 capital A. The fourth clause. As on today, as soon as we read these words, false entry, the first thing that haunts to our mind is 271 AAC is the new provision. And I must say that provision is in addition to what can be the penalty levied under 270 capital A. Now, false entry, if assessing officer finds in the books of account that there is some false entry, and the assessee is not able to prove it, then obviously the expense would be disallowed or addition would be made, and the difference which comes in the return of processed income and the assessed income would be treated as misreporting of income in consequence of making or recording a false entry in the books of account. E. Failure to record any receipt in the books of account having a bearing on total income. Now, very interestingly, this provision clause E has been qualified with the requirement of having a bearing on total income. Although, as I discussed earlier, and I've been arises until unless there is some bearing on the total income, there is some difference that is created from returned or processed income to assessed income, the penalty cannot be levied. However, they have specifically qualified in this clause that in case you fail to record any receipt in the books of account having a bearing on total income, then only we will make it as case of misreporting. Probably, to my mind, the thing behind this qualifying that it should have a bearing on total income, maybe for that, say, for example, assessing officer finds during the course of assessment, assessee has taken a loan from XY, Mr. X, and has not recorded this receipt in the books of account. And if the assessee is able to substantiate the 4 ingredients, I would say rather earlier it was 3, but now 4th source of source, that is why I say 4th, thing of section 68, and the loan is treated as genuine loan. In that case, although there is a failure to record this receipt in the books of account, but it does not have any bearing on total income. And therefore, the legislature in its wisdom must have qualified in respect of such cases where receipt is a bigger term, is a broader term, and they wanted only to cover income. But as I discussed, that only and only until and unless underreported income arises, until unless these acts, these cases of misreporting of income, these actions lead to underreported income, penalty under 270A cannot be triggered. As far as misreporting of income, the assessing officer, the burden is on the assessing officer, and he is required to pass a speaking order and to give specific reasons in his order that why and how is he bringing my case in these 6 clauses. It has to be a proper speaking order, and the charge should be levied. Subsection 10 is straightforward. As I discussed, the tax has to be computed where no return or return is being filed for the first time under 148. Then obviously underreported income would be increased by the basic exemption limit, and the tax would be computed. In case of company and firms, the income assessed is the underreported income, and that would be the amount on which tax is to be computed. With respect to loss cases, the underreported income, which is to be computed as loss to loss difference or loss to income difference, on that the tax has to be computed. Rest, where returned income is there or earlier assessed income is there, X minus Y is to be done, and tax on assessed income minus tax on returned income is to be computed. So 11 and 12 would be taken accordingly. Now, sir, I'd like to discuss 4 or 5 very interesting scenarios which arose after we have gone through this whole provision of 12 subsections. The first thing I want to highlight is that I'm talking about in cases where return has been filed. The provision starts from processed income under section 143(1)(a). Now you may remember that 143(1)(a) has 6 different adjustments. It may be on account of arithmetical error. It may be on account of claiming any apparent incorrect deduction, claiming exemption or deduction which is not allowable as return has been filed on after the date under 139(1), and such other adjustments which are made under 143(1)(a). Now, since in subsection 2 and even in the calculation of underreported income, it starts from 143(1)(a), so the adjustments, the amendments which are made while processing the return 1A will not be visited by penalty under section 270 capital A. The concept behind this Maybe for the reason that if something is so apparent from record, something which can be so easily found from the record, then that means the assessee never had the intention to hide that from the assessing officer. In that case, they may be thinking that there is no requirement to penalize the assessee. But does this explanation sound good? Because in case an assessee claims any expenditure which is completely wholly unsustainable in law, or even after filing a late return claims exemption which is apparently not available in law, then I believe such instances of grave errors should be visited with penalty. But however, legislature in its own wisdom has kept that 143(1)(a) adjustment made will not be visited with penalty under 270 capital A. Now, second very interesting situation, in case of search, I already have highlighted that the specified years are outside the scope of 270A. But you may remember that in case of search, 153A, 7 years are done, 2 specified years at best, and the earlier 5 years. Here, in case the assessee is filing the return for the first time in response to notice under section 153A and files some income in it, then that income will not be visited with penalty under section 270A. I have already taken note of it, and I mentioned it that in case of 148, first time filing return or reassessment of return filing again in 148, enhancing the income would in any case be visited, would be visited with penalty subject to subsection 6 obviously. But over here, in the person or who are considered to have underreported income, or in the computation of underreported income, probably there is an omission which has been done, and they have forgot to cover situation where return is filed for the first time in response to notice under 153A. That is the second peculiar situation which arises. The third thing I want to highlight, I give an example. Say I filed a return. The assessee, while computing the total income, computes total income of 50 lakh rupees and has brought forward losses of 60 lakh rupees. Now, while making the computation, the assessee files return as assessed at loss of rupees at nil income and carries forward loss of 10 lakh rupees. The returned income is nil income, kindly note. While making assessment, say assessing officer makes an addition of 8 lakh rupees. So the total income of the year becomes 58 lakh, and since I had more 10 lakh of carried forward losses, 8 lakh of loss is again adjusted, and my returned income, rather my assessed income, is again nil. Since there is no difference in the assessed income and the returned or processed income, therefore there is no case of underreporting of it. Penalty under 278 does not arise in this case. However, since the loss which I carried forward, that reduces from 10 to 2. So impact, if any, in the subsequent if it is there in creating some difference between assessed income and the returned or processed income, then it will attract 270 capital A, subject to obviously provisions of the Act as I discussed. Now, sir, 143(1)(a), they have given that there would the adjustment, even if made, no penalty would be visited. But what about cases where assessment is done and assessing officer makes 154? To my understanding and in my short span, we haven't seen any order where in 154 the assessing officer initiates penalty. And you may remember that they updated the income rectified under 154 becomes your assessed income. So under the definition of the provisions, the assessed income after 154, if there is enhancement in it and if there is assessed income, there is difference between the assessed income after 154 and the processed income. In that case also, there is possibility that the case of underreported income may arise. So that analogy, mistake apparent from record, whether it would be applied or not, is a question which we'll see in time to come. However, in 154 cases, I believe the benefit of subsection 6 clause A would be available, because something which is already coming out of record, unless it is something so bizarre, so apparently unsustainable in law, so erroneously claimed, I don't think so penalty would be levied under the adjustment or attenuation made under section 154.
Well, you may conclude now.
Yes, I'll just take 2-3 minutes. The last thing which I want to discuss is subsection 4 and 5. Now, subsection 4 and 5, as I discussed, I'll quickly explain this provision with the help of an example. During the course of assessment year 1920, the assessing officer finds that there is some investment in the case of the assessee. When the assessing officer asks the assessee that already explain me the source of this investment, assessee says, sir, additions were made in assessment year 17-18 and 14-15 on the basis of estimated GP addition. And for the sake of ease, investment is 5 lakh. In assessment year 17-18 addition there was 10 lakh rupees. In assessment year 14-15 it was 5 lakh rupees. So the provision subsection 4 and 5 says that if the assessee seeks to explain any investment, deposit or receipt, that is the investment in this year, by way of any addition made in years prior to the current assessment year, and the most important thing, no penalty has been levied on such addition. In that case, such amount, if sought to be used as covering this investment, would be treated as underreported income. Now, kindly note, this underreported income would relate to which year? This is given in subsection 5. In my example, section 5 says it would relate to assessment year 17-18 and assessment year 14-15. So 10 lakh would be underreported income for assessment year 17-18 and 5 lakh would be underreported income for, rather I would say 5 lakh would in any case cannot be covered under subsection 4 and 5, because you may recall this provision is applicable from assessment year 17-18. So in this case, the assessing officer would be required to bring back the ghost of section 271(1)(c), which provides subsection 1. 271 provides subsection 1A, which will give the initiation power, and notice has to be issued. The penalty has to be levied under 271(1)(c), read with explanation 2 of section 271(1)(c). So 14-15 can be covered only and only to levy penalty under 271(1)(c) only. So last, that whether with respect to 17-18, this 10 lakh which the officer would like over it as underreported can be treated as underreported income. Yes, it can be treated, but whether penalty can be levied, since time limit for initiating penalty for the proceeding to 17-18 have expired, can it be done? That is the question would be answered if we examine that whether penalty can be initiated or penalty is required to be initiated under the provisions of 271(a) or not. And if yes, then I only conclude to say that under 270(a), specifically for subsection 4 and 5, there is no mechanism to condone the delay similar to the erstwhile provision, or rather I would not say erstwhile, 271(1)(a) to bring out this underreported income out of the clutches of limitation. So in my case, if assessing officer does not have the limitation of time available to assess 17-18, then underreported income, though relating to 17-18, penalty cannot be applied. If the requirement of penalty to be initiated under 270(a) is there, and that is a question with which I'll conclude, and I pose to Gupta sir to please deliberate on it. With this, I thank you all, and over to Gupta sir.
Thank you, Somil. Very nice presentation. Now, since you have covered substantially, but then I will try to pick up certain things. Now, subsection 1, as Somil has said, empowers the 3 authorities. Kindly show subsection 1. Assessing officer, CIT appeal, and the principal commissioner. Now, so far as assessing officer is concerned, now the situation is very clear that in respect of the additions of the disallowances he would make, and that additions and disalliances which he makes would constitute underreported income, and therefore qua such underreported income he would assume jurisdiction to impose penalty by issuing the direction to pay penalty. But then commissioner appeal would have two kinds of jurisdiction. You know, when commissioner appeal is hearing an appeal against the penalty order, then by virtue of section 251 he has got power of enhancement of that penalty. So but then that enhancement of penalty which he is entitled to make under section 251 is by virtue of his power of enhancement contained under section 251. That is not because of section 270 capital A. But then in respect of the quantum appeal, CIT appeal may enhance assessment either by making addition or by making disalliance of some expense. Therefore, qua such enhanced income or qua such disalliance which he would make in the quantum appeal, then commissioner appeal would have jurisdiction to impose penalty under section 270 capital A. Similarly, principal commissioner now has got two types of jurisdiction under section 263. If he is seeking to revise a penalty order or an order in which assessing officer dropped the penalty, in any case that will also be a penalty order, and commissioner or principal commissioner finds on examination of the record after calling it that such penalty which has been dropped or which has been levied less than what it ought to have been, then principal commissioner or commissioner, finding that penalty order as erroneous and prejudicial to the interest of revenue, now can revise that penalty order. But this jurisdiction under section 270 capital A is not in respect of this penalty. Now there is another kind of revision order like against the quantum assessment order. Now if commissioner or principal commissioner finds that the assessment order passed by assessing officer is erroneous and prejudicial to the interest of revenue, then he can inter alia enhance the assessment at his own level. Instead of remitting the matter back to the assessing officer, he himself can make enhancement. So qua such enhancement which he makes or any disalliance which commissioner or principal commissioner makes in 263 order, now principal commissioner or commissioner qua such enhanced income or disalliance can initiate penalty and can give direction to pay penalty to the assessing to the assessee. So legislature in section 270 capital A has though used the expression during the course of any proceeding, then they have used this expression during the course of any proceeding for this reason that before the assessing officer it is the assessment proceeding, before CIT appeal it is the quantum appeal proceeding, before principal commissioner it is 263 proceeding. And therefore in order to indicate that during the course of any of these proceedings, these authorities qua the items of income which I just discussed then can initiate penalty and can give directions to impose penalty. Now as Somil has rightly said that subsection 2 and 3 has got several permutations and combinations. We need not to be lost in them. We have to understand in a broad manner that whenever there is a difference between the assessed income and processed income, underreported income automatically results. Now out of this automatically resulted underreported income, now if any addition or disalliance falls under clause A to E of subsection 6, as Somil has discussed extensively, now that will be used from this automatically resulted underreported income. And thereafter it will be seen that if there is still some difference left, now whether that difference is as a result of misreporting made by the SSE. Somil has exhaustively said that legislature has given 6 exhaustive instances whereby it can be said that this is a misreporting instances. But all those 6 instances, as Somil has very rightly pointed out, should lead to the addition to the income. If they do not lead to the addition of income, and there can very well be situations where though there is misreporting of income and yet there is no substantive addition, which can be made in the returned income, and since no substantive addition comes to be made, there will not be any difference between the assessed income and the processed income. Then there will not be any underreported income. Since there will not be any underreported income, there is no tax payable which would be computed, and therefore the machinery would fail and there will not be any penalty. So despite a case of misrepresentation, suppression, despite the case of claim of expenditure, though in some of the instances, some of the situations, there may not result in the substantive additions to the returned income. So under subsection 9, it is essential that additions should be made based on these instances, and overlapping is also possible. Now, if you remember in the case of section 271(1)(c), we always used to argue, sir, assessing officer has initiated penalty for concealment of particulars of income, whereas he has come to impose penalty for furnishing inaccurate particulars of income. Sir, the notice which has been issued under section 271(1)(c), inapplicable clauses have not been struck, the satisfaction has not been recorded, penalty has not been initiated, so on and so forth. Now, all those arguments which we as counsels used to take in case of section 271(1)(c), legislature has tried, kindly mind my expression which I am using, legislature has tried to play smart and has made an attempt to draft section 270 capital A in such a manner so that the availability of these super technical and hyper technical arguments are lost. But I would say that the legislature has created self-goal, because there are so many things which are scattered under the Income Tax Act and even in section 270 capital A itself, which would envisage, which would contemplate, which would visualize, which would require the income tax officer or the assessing officer to not only initiate but then to record as to penalty has been initiated for what default. So if despite legislature's attempt to draft section 270 capital A subsection 1 in this manner, as if that these authorities have simply to give directions in the penalty order to pay penalty on the underreported income and nothing else, but section 275 which speaks of limitation, section 270 capital A which gives immunity from the levy of penalty under section 270A. Then there are other provisions in section 270A itself which shows, and particularly subsection 9 now, which says that in case underreported income is in consequence to misreporting of income because of one or more of those 6 instances, and because of which the assessing officer assumes power to levy penalty equal to 200% of the tax payable on such misreported income, then if you read our article, then you would come to know that at least 5, 6 or 7 solid legal bases are there, based upon which we have in our respectful submissions have opined that it is still necessary for the assessing officer not only to initiate penalty, but then to give a finding in the assessment order that penalty is being initiated under section 270 capital A on what account of default. So legislature has tried to draft section 270 capital A in a very seemingly intelligent manner, but has failed again miserably. And therefore, all those arguments which used to be there in section 271(1)(c), when we used to argue the matter, are still available, would still be available in the context of section 270 capital A. Now, as I said, that the difference between the assessed income and the returned income or the processed income would constitute underreported income. That would be the base for levying the penalty, subject to the exclusion as prescribed under subsection 6 and subject to whether any of these additions is as a result of misreporting of income, and so that will constitute the base. So if an assessee revises the return in time, now whether that revised return, which ultimately will be processed, now whether that revised income now whether can be taken for the purpose of imposing penalty or not. Suppose an SSE filed original return, say for 20 lakhs of rupees. मैं kindly अजय जी जरा
म्यूट कर रहा हूं,
करिएगा, डिस्टर्बेंस हो रही है. सबको म्यूट कर दीजिएगा, मैं म्यूट कर लूंगा अपने आप को प्लीज.
मेरा कनेक्शन ही
किसके पास है कंट्रोल?
मेरे पास ये सर वो, लेकिन मेरा सिस्टम है.
देखिए कितना डिस्टर्बेंस है. दिस इज वेरी अनफेयर, इट्स वेरी अनफेयर. Anyway, so now suppose an SSE has filed return of say 20 lakhs of rupees, and then he seeks to revise it to 50 lakhs of rupees, and that revision is made in time, and assessment is made at say 50 lakhs of rupees only. So question comes, since there is no difference between the assessed income and the revised return income, now whether
सर म्यूट कर लीजिएगा, वो अनम्यूट कर लीजिएगा आपने.
okay, yes. Now in such a situation the question comes, since there is no difference between the assessed income and the revised return income, now whether there can be any penalty or not. SSE would say, since I have revised the return, there is no difference between my return income now and the assessed income, penalty should not be levied because there is no underreported income. But one thing which has to be borne in mind, and which I tell you, Anil Verma ji is there before me. He would remember there used to be Dr. Sampurnanand in Agra, and I have seen his orders. He was a very brilliant officer. Now, this is for a brilliant officer to hold that the revision made by you cannot be said to be revision in accordance with law. Therefore, the nature of additional income which you offer in the revised return, that is very important. Because under section 139 subsection 5, what can you revise is the omission or the wrong statement discovered by you. So if it was not an omission, or even if it was a wrong statement, but if it cannot be said that you discovered it, because discovery presupposes that you were not aware initially when you filed your return. You have discovered it. You have just stumbled upon that kind of an omission or wrong statement. But then if the nature of addition which you have offered in your revised return shows, and there can be n number of instances when the additions or the additional income can show that you already knew it. Therefore, in such a situation, such revised return may not be treated as a validly filed revised return, may be filed in time, but then may not be crossing the hurdles put by section 139(5) in the form of certain expressions used in the language like omission, wrong statement, discovery. And therefore, in such a situation, when assessing officer rejects your revised return, then like a snake and ladder, you will fall back to your original return, and then there will be difference between the 50 lakhs and 20 lakhs, that is 30 lakhs, and that will result in the underreported income. So, I mean, there are a couple of questions which were there. Now, whether if there was any false entry, now can there be penalty under section 270 capital A, and whether there can be penalty under section 271 double AD. So let us understand first of all that we need not to be agitated over. We need not to be agitated over it. There is no constitutional guarantee in the civil matters that there will not be any double jeopardy. The rule of double jeopardy, that a person should not be punished twice for one and the same default, it is applicable in case of the criminal jurisprudence. Penalties, though, are quasi-criminal in nature, but then Supreme Court has said that essentially they are of civil nature. Therefore, you cannot be heard saying कि सर एक तो आपने सेक्शन 270 में पेनल्टी लगा दी, फिर आप 271 में भी पेनल्टी लगा रहे हो. There are 4 or 5 independent consequences. His books of accounts can be rejected. If flat rate of tax, profit can be estimated, or certain adjustments or additions can be made, then there can be penalty under section 270. There can be penalty for false entry under 271 There can be penalty or there can be prosecutions on account of the falsification of books of account. So all these consequences are separate, distinct, and independent. That has to be borne in mind. So this is sum and substance of section 270 capital A. Still, if there are questions, then I would take. But prior to that, let me quickly finish about the cash transactions which are discouraged, or which are discouraged in the sense that disabilities or disincentives have been created under the Income Tax Act. So you must have seen as a constant efforts on the part of government to inject or to move towards the less cash economy. Because in the matter of cash payments or the cash receipts, that trail to establish that where from that cash has originated, that is very difficult. If you remember in section 40A3, when it was brought in 1968, now board came out with a circular, and that circular said in very many words that it is very difficult to track the cash payments, and therefore section 40A3 at that time was enacted. So trail of cash is difficult to be established, and thus it helps tax evaders and it helps in tax evasion. And of course, when the tax evasion happens, then the state's revenue takes the hit. And when the state's revenue takes the hit, it is my and your money which takes the hit. And therefore, less cash economy is sought to be encouraged, and at the same time, it is sought to be discouraged. Our Income Tax Act has got several disincentive provisions, and at the same time of late has started making certain provisions to give incentive that you should not enter into the cash transactions. So today we will discuss all of them. There may be some provisions which may not be of much use to all of us, like section 13 capital A. Now it speaks about the taxability or the exemption of the exemption of the income of the political party. Now, one of the conditions of the exemption is that if the donation received by the political party above rupees 2,000 should be otherwise than through cash. So if there is a cash donation of rupees 2,000 exceeding rupees 2,000, then section 13A says that for that much of income, that political party will not enjoy tax exemption. Then we have got section 35 AD. Section 35 AD now speaks of the deduction which is based on the investment. That is called the investment linked deduction. Instead, profit linked deduction, investment linked deduction. Eligible assessees in eligible business are entitled to claim deduction of the profits or gains under that business equal to the amount of investment. And what is the quantum of investment? Now, one of the conditions is that if there is any investment into the capital asset exceeding rupees 10,000, which has been made in cash or which has been made otherwise than by way of an account pay check or account pay bank draft or through electronic clearing system, through the bank account or through any other electronic mode, then such amount will not be treated as a part of the investment. And since it will not be part of the investment, then you will not be entitled to claim that much amount of investment as a deduction under section 35 AD. Now this provision has been brought by Finance Act 2017. The next section, and this section may not have been noticed by us, and that section is the business deduction under section 36. In section 36, there is subsection 1 And in subsection 1, there is a clause small I B. And that clause IB in section 36(1) says that if a person carrying on business or profession has paid insurance premium to effect a policy on the health of its employees, and if any amount of such premium on such policy has been paid without any threshold, has been paid otherwise through by an account pay check or account pay bank draft, then such amount will not be allowed as a deductions while computing the income under that business. So this is section 36 subsection 1 clause small Roman I, 1 small b. Then we have got section 40A3 and subsection 3A. As I said, that 1968 was the year which saw several anti-tax avoidance measures flowing. Section 40A3 was one of them. And section 40A3 initially the limit was rupees 2,500, then it was increased later on 10,000 rupees, then it was again raised to 20,000 rupees, but then later on, about 2-3 years back, it has been again brought down to 10,000 rupees. The section says that if an expenditure which you are seeking to claim against your business income or professional income is made to a person in a day exceeding rupees 10,000, otherwise by way of an account pay check or bank draft or through electronic clearing system through bank or through any other electronic mode, then such expenditure will not be allowed. There was a time, few years back, when 20% of such payment used to be disallowed. Anil Verma ji is there from Agra, I remember. There were one has been incurred, which is genuine, accepted by the payee, that he has received the amount. Now, whether section 40A3 can be invoked for the purpose of making disallowance of the genuine business expense, that is a question. I will come to that later. But 10,000 rupees exceeding rupees 10,000 made to a person against an expenditure in a day, then that will not be allowed as a. But in case that expenditure is in respect of the freight charges paid to a transporter in respect of the goods carriage, kindly mind, in respect of goods carriage, whether for plying, leasing or hiring, then this 10,000 is not 10,000, then it should be in excess of 35,000 rupees. Now that is the limit which has been made. So even if you are making payment employer in excess of 10 by way of an account pay check or bank draft. Yes, but at the time of resignation or at the time of retrenchment or at the time of death, if total amount is not in excess of 50,000 rupees, then this amount can be paid in cash. That is what that is what. Now, if in the initial year you may not have paid, but then you have incurred the liability, and based upon the incurrence of liability, since you are following mercantile system of accounting, you have claimed such expenditure against your business profits. But later on, you have violated this provision by making payment of this expenditure to that person exceeding rupees 10,000 in a day. Then 40A subsection 3 capital A says that the year in which this violation has been made by you will be the year in which such violated amount will be treated as your income under that business. That is what this. Now, but then there are rule 6DD which has been made and which contains exceptions. And one of the exception is that if there was a bank holiday or there was a bank strike, then obviously, and the payment is required to be made on that day. It is not that you chose to make payment on a bank holiday, but then payment should be required to be made. Now, how you would prove it, because whether the payment was required to be made or not is essentially something which is a question of fact. And when it is a question of fact, the burden will be on you to discharge this burden, because it is you and you who want to be seen covered by the exception. Therefore, burden rests on your shoulder. So in case you want to make out your case under any of those exceptions which are there under Rule 6DD, then this will be for you to lead evidence that this is the reason, these are the factual metrics, these are the evidences, and because of this, you fall under any one or more exceptions of Rule 6DD. Now, whether such amount can be disallowed even if such payment is genuine or not. Now, this is something which is quite tricky answer. Now, even if the board has said that the objective of section 40A3 is to ensure that no ingenuine expenditures comes to be allowed. But then the language of section 40, suppose if an expenditure is not genuine, then obviously that cannot be allowed to you under section 37. That will be disallowed. That will be disallowed. So genuineness is one consideration, but then you will have to show some extraordinary factors and circumstances. And that may bring you under any of the exceptions of Rule 6DD, and thereby you can wriggle out from the rigor of section 40A3. That is that. Now the next section is section 43(1). Now this was added by Finance Act 2017. Section 43(1) defines as to what will be the cost of acquisition. The determination of the cost of acquisitions for the purpose of computation of income under the head business from section 28 to 43C. So if there is any capital expenditure which has been incurred, regarding which you have made payment exceeding rupees 10,000 to a person in a day, otherwise by way of an account pay, check or bank draft, then section 43(1) says that payment so made will be ignored, or cost of acquisition to that extent will be ignored, and it will be assumed as if cost of acquisition is the actual cost of acquisition as reduced by such violated amount. Therefore, its impact would be, if that asset is depreciable, then there will be lesser amount of depreciation which will be admissible to you. The second implication can be when you happen to sell this asset being part of the block of assets. Now in that situation, since that payment which has been made in violation of section 43(1) now will be ignored, then this will be ignored even for the purpose of computing the short-term capital gain under section 50. That has to be borne in mind. But if you have made payment for the acquisition of the land is not depreciable. So even if that cost is ignored, but that cost is ignored for the purpose of section 28 to 43C. Since land is not depreciable, there will never be a compute capital gain section 50. So if at later stage you want to sell that land, and of course that land will be capital asset, in that situation, this payment which you have made exceeding rupees 10,000 in violation of section 43, now that will not be disregarded for the purpose of cost of acquisition of this land. So this distinction now will have to be borne in mind. Now section 44AB now has been amended. 44AB is about the tax audit. Now it has been amended by the Finance Act 2020. Now instead of creating disincentive, the incentive is sought to be given to the businessman. Now we know that we have got the tax audit limit of rupees 1 crore under section 44AB. Finance Act 2020 says that you are not required to get your accounts audited under section 44AB from the chartered accountants in case the total amount of receipts in cash is not more than 5% of your total receipts, and 5% of the total payment should not be in cash. So if total receipts and total payments respectively 5% and 5% are to the extent of cash, then you are not required to get your accounts audited up to the turnover or gross receipts limit of rupees 5 crores. So this is a incentive, maybe disincentive for chartered accountants, but then It is an incentive for the SSE, which section 44AB has sought to give. Similarly, section 44AD is a section which deems 8% or the higher amount of the gross receipts as the deemed income under that business in case the total turnover is not more than 2 crores of rupees. Now, Finance Act 2017 created one incentive to the taxpayer by saying that in normal circumstances, 8% is the minimum presumptive income. But in case, in respect of those incomes or those receipts or those sales which you make through electronic means or through banking channel, then on that amount of sale, then we will assume minimum presumptive income rate of 6% instead of 8%. So under section 44AD, amended by Finance Act 2017, in respect of the sales effected through the banking channel, the presumptive rate of income would be 6%, not 8%. So this is incentive. Now under section 80D is the deductions on account of premium or medical expenditure paid by an SSE, paid by an individual or HUF. Now section 80D says that if cash payment is made for the purpose of taking the policy or meeting the medical expenditure, then that will not be allowed as a deduction under section 80D. If that cash expenditure has been paid for the preventive medical health check, that is also one of the ingredients which is allowed as a deduction under section 80D. For that, payment in cash is permissible. But then if you want to pay a premium, if you want to incur medical expenditure, you want to claim under section 80D, then you will have to incur that expenditure through the account pay check or account pay bank draft or through electronic clearing system. Only then that deduction will be allowed to you. Similarly, under section 80G, if the donation, earlier this limit used to be the limit exceeding rupees 10,000. So before Finance Act 2017, any donation exceeding rupees 10,000, if made otherwise by way of an account pay check or bank draft or electronic clearing system, now used to be disallowed. No deduction under section 80G could have been claimed. But now that deduction of 10,000, that threshold of 10,000 has been reduced to rupees 2,000. So if there is any donation exceeding rupees 2,000, which has been paid in cash, that will not qualify for deduction under section 80G. Similarly, there is 80GGA. I mean, donation for scientific research or rural development. The limit is more than 10,000 rupees. If the donation is, then it has to be through the banking system. Up to less than 10,000 or 10,000 or less 10,000, it can be in cash. Next sections are there 80GGB and 80GGC. That if you are making payment or contributions to a political party, 80GGB is applicable in case of a company who is making contributions to the political party. 80GGC is applicable to any person other than the company. So in case contributions are made to the political party and company or the other than company wants to claim deduction under section 80GGB and GGC, that contribution which has not been paid in cash alone will qualify for deduction under section 80GGB and GGC. So not even a single penny can be paid in cash, and then you cannot be heard claiming deductions under section 80GGB and GGC. 194N. Now this section was added in the Armory by Finance Act 2019 with effect from 1st September 2019. Now this section says that every banking company, cooperative society, kindly see the height. While at the time of making payment to any person, in the previous year, exceeding rupees 1 crore in aggregate from all accounts which that bank is holding of that person, then the bank has to deduct 2% as TDS under section 194N. So when I read this section in the morning, the first question which came in my mind is, how would the bank be monitoring such kind of a thing? Because if a person has got several bank accounts across the country and withdrawing cash from all of them, how the bank would be keeping tab and track that, okay, now there is a limit, so digitization is there, but then kindly imagine not only the banking company, the cooperative society has also been roped in. So first of all, how the banks or the cooperative societies may be monitoring such kind of payments for the purpose of deducting tax at source 2%. And the second thing, now if a person is withdrawing his own money from his bank account, I mean, there is not even the slightest element of any income. The TDS is always there on such amount which has got some element of income. So if there is no element of income, and yet banks are required to deduct tax at source out of such payments, now whether such section would stand to the scrutiny on the constitutional touchstone, I mean, or will be read down by the court, I mean, that is something which is in the womb of time, and we may come across someday some situation whereby this provision may at least be read down by the court. Then we have got section 269 SS and section 269D. No person. Now this section starts, no person shall accept or take any loan or deposit. Initially, only loan or deposit used to be there. Then later on, in 2015 or so, specified sum was also added. So the section now is, no person shall take or accept any loan or deposit or specified sum from any other person, a rupees 20,000 or more, otherwise than by an account pay check or bank draft. Or if there is already a balance, and after taking this amount of fresh loan or deposit or the specified sum, it becomes 20,000 rupees or more, then also the prohibition is there under section 269 SS. So if a person has not taken any loan from a person, he wants to take 5,000, 5,000, 5,000 in cash, it is permissible. But the fourth 5,000 which he takes, and that would make 20,000, and 20,000 or more is the limit which has been given in section 269. It is not exceeding 20,000. It says 20,000 rupees or more. So if the last 5,000 rupees in this example which I gave has to be by way of an account pay check, there may well be another instance. I have taken 19,000 rupees, for example, by way of an account pay check. Now I cannot take even 1,000 rupees, because that 1,000 rupees make it 20,000. 1,000 rupees in cash, because the amount already outstanding, by taking this additional amount, it becomes 20,000 rupees or more. Otherwise, then by way of account pay check or bank draft, it is not permissible. And now kindly see, initially when this section was brought, the threshold was 10,000 rupees. It was made 20,000 rupees later on. Loan or deposit, a specified sum. Specified sum means any payment in or any advance in or any payment received in connection with an advance or otherwise in respect of the transfer of immovable property, whether the transfer of the property has taken place or not. So not only it covers the advance, but then the amount which you pay before the registrar at the time of registration, because it says advance or otherwise. So even that will be covered. That has to be by way of an account pay check or bank draft, if it is 20,000 rupees or more. And kindly see whether it is for personal purpose, that loan or deposit or a specified sum, or for business purpose, it is irrelevant. This is applicable to all SSEs across the board with certain exceptions. One of the exception is that if giver of the loan and the taker of the loan both are agriculturists or having agricultural income, and they don't have any income chargeable to tax. Any income means they should not have even 1,000 rupees as any other income which is chargeable to tax. It is not maximum amount which is not chargeable to tax. Any income which is chargeable to tax. So in case of transactions taking place between the two agriculturists who are having agricultural income, are not having any, but then it is very difficult to fathom and visualize that the agriculturist also does not have even the interest income from the bank. So, but then the legislature in its wisdom has made that kind of an exception, then has made that kind of exception. Till 1989, there used to be no penalty. There used to be prosecution. From 1/4/1989, that prosecution was dispensed with and it was replaced by penalty. And the penalty is under section 271, capital D. And kindly see, if there is an advance during the course of business which we have received, then it is neither loan nor deposit nor the specified sum. And the person who is giving, there is no implication on him. So this person who is accepting the business advance, now he is not to be hit by section 269 SS. Then we have got corresponding provision 269T, that no person shall repay any amount of loan or deposit or specified advance if the amount taken as loan or deposit or specified advance is rupees 20,000 or more. So if there was a loan or deposit or a specified advance of rupees 20,000 or more, not even a single penny can be paid. Otherwise, then by way of an account pay check or account pay bank draft. And if violation is made, then there is a penalty of an equal amount by which the violation of the section has taken place. Like 269 SS, there used to be prosecution. 1989, it was replaced with penalty. Now, section 269 ST has been added. Section 269 ST has been added by Finance Act 2017. It says no person shall accept rupees 2 lakhs or more. Again, the word is 2 lakhs or more in aggregate from a person in a day. Now, these three situations are very important. No person shall accept, no person shall receive an amount of rupees 2 lakhs or more in aggregate from a person in a day. 2, in respect of a single transaction. 3, in respect of the transaction involving a single event or occasion from a person, otherwise then by way of an account pay check or account pay bank draft or use of electronic clearing system through the bank or through any other electronic mode. So this restriction is, there are three kinds of restrictions, that rupees 2 lakhs or more you will not receive in aggregate from a person in a day. So if you have raised, say, 5 bills on a person, 40,000, 40,000, 40,000, you cannot receive rupees 2 lakhs in a day from a person, because that will be violation of clause A of section 269 ST. The second says in respect of a single transaction. So if there was a transaction of more than rupees 2 lakhs, say you have made a sale of rupees 3 lakhs. Now in respect of this single transaction of 3 lakhs, now you cannot receive any amount in cash. That will be violation. That will be violation of clause B of section 269 ST. And the third situation, in respect of transaction relating to one event or occasion from a person. So if there was one occasion and suppose there was a marriage function, occasion was one, a person has provided several services and several services bill individually was less than 2 lakhs of rupees. Since transaction is relating to one event, that is marriage, you cannot be heard, and that is in excess of rupees 2 lakh. You cannot be heard or you cannot be seen paying even a single rupee in cash. Otherwise, there will be violation of section 269 ST, and then there will be penalty. And kindly see, it may not be related to your business. It may be personal. It may be tax-free. It may be taxable event. It may be, it can be anything. But then the person who is giving is not caught under section 269 ST. In respect of the person who is making payment, he may be covered under different sections like 48(3) or 43(1). That is a different matter. But under section 269T, the restriction is on the person who is receiving that amount, not on the person who is paying that amount. So it may be on account of cash sale, it may be on account of share capital, it may be on account of business advance, it may be on account of capital from the partner. Though sometimes it is said that any amount received from a partner by a partnership firm now should not be seen as if one person is receiving from other person, because under the general law, partnership firm is a compendious name of all the partners put together. Therefore, that is also one of the arguments. But under the Income Tax Act, partner is a separate person. Partnership firm is a separate person. So whether that argument will be available, that is also a quite litigative question. Amount received from your debtor. But of course, if you have accepted any loan or deposit or a specified sum, which is punishable under section 269 SS, then definitely that will not come under section 269 ST. It has been so provided. Then I will finish it by saying that cash transactions at times, from the standpoint of we professionals, also pose problem, because when the clients enter into the cash transactions, and since we have to represent, then if we see on the genuineness parameters, it may become very difficult, not impossible, to prove and establish the genuineness of those transactions with which we are associating this cash receipts of the cash payment. So these are the measures, whether by giving incentive or distancing under the Income Tax Act, based upon which the cash transactions are discouraged under the provisions of the Income Tax Act. So friends, if there are questions, then I will take it. I do not find any questions in the chat box. That may be for a variety of reasons. And one of the reasons which suits me is that I have clarified everything so nicely that there was no scope for any questions to remain and to be left. But anyway, that is on the lighter side. If there are questions on penalty under section 270 capital A or in respect of these cash payments or the cash receipts under the Income Tax Act, then I'll take the questions.
I think there are 2-3 questions in the chat box.
Chat box तो खाली है सर.
Sir, 539 पे Mr. Sanjay Tanda.
तो सर आप मुझे तो चैट एक्सेस कराइए. मैं चैट बॉक्स खोल रहा हूँ तो कुछ नहीं आ रहा है.
एक सेकंड सर, एक सेकंड.
हाँ, आ गया. यस. तो मैं क्वेश्चंस लूं सर.
हाँ जी सर. In the meantime, I am muting all the participants, and whosoever wants to take the question can unmute himself.
Yes. So मैं ये ले रहा हूँ धर्मेंद्र कुमार.
सर आपको भी करना पड़ेगा, आपको भी अनम्यूट करना.
हाँ, यस. धर्मेंद्र कुमार जी हमारे मित्र हैं लखनऊ से और काफी वाकपटु मित्र हैं हमारे. उनकी क्वेरी है, उनको हालांकि संतुष्ट करना इतना आसान काम नहीं होता है. तो उनका प्रश्न है, व्हेन एसएससी रिवाइजेस रिटर्न ड्यूरिंग असेसमेंट प्रोसीडिंग्स on the basis of certain omissions which is not discovered by AO, whether penalty under section 270A can be levied on such revision. बड़ा अच्छा प्रश्न है. उनके प्रश्न सारे बड़े अच्छे होते हैं. इसमें देखिए धर्मेंद्र जी, डिस्कवरी एसएससी के द्वारा होनी चाहिए. एसेसिंग ऑफिसर डिस्कवर कर पाए या नहीं कर पाए, सेक्शन में है ओमिशन और रॉन्ग स्टेटमेंट डिस्कवर्ड बाय एसएससी. Ultimately the revision has to be made by the SSC. So if omission or wrong statement is discovered by SSC, it is all right. But if it will be discovered by assessing officer, now that is the next level question with which we may not be concerned with. So for revision, these are the 3 ingredients: omission, wrong statement, discovery, and the time limit. The return was revised. Pranvesh Arya sir hai. Return was revised because the residential status of the SSC was wrongly mentioned in the original return as resident instead of non-resident, which resulted in paying extra tax, whether tantamount to misreporting. No. यहाँ तो आप नॉन रेजिडेंट, यहाँ तो आप रेजिडेंट दिखलाकर उनको ज्यादा टैक्स पे करवा रहे हैं। तो इसमें तो मिस रिपोर्टिंग यदि कुछ हो भी गया, हालांकि इट इज एन एक्सीडेंटल ओमिशन, यदि मिस रिपोर्टिंग हो भी गया तो इससे कोई टैक्स नहीं बनेगा, टैक्स नहीं बनेगा तो पेनल्टी का क्या मतलब है? प्रणेश जी दोबारा पूछ रहे हैं, एसएससी स्टेड इन इंडिया फॉर 60 days ड्यूरिंग द प्रीवियस ईयर and 365 days during 4 years preceding that year and was under a bona fide belief that he was resident and forgot that in case being citizen। हाँ तो ठीक है, ये इस केस में तो रिवीजन बनेगा वैसे भी, और जो रिवीजन भी है वो एसएससी के एडवांटेज का है और इसके लिए परफेक्ट जस्टिफिकेशन। संजय चांडक जी हमारे मित्र फरीदाबाद से हैं, हमारे बड़े प्यारे मित्र हैं। वेदर एसएससी हैविंग टर्नओवर ऑफ 3.5 करोड़ and all through checks can opt under section 44AD। नहीं 44AD में जो 2 करोड़ की जो थ्रेशोल्ड है वो तो थ्रेशोल्ड लगेगी। 3.5 करोड़ होते ही आप 44AD से बाहर हो गए। हाँ, अब आपको 44AB में ऑडिट कराना 2020 के अमेंडमेंट के बाद, चूंकि सारे चेक से हैं तो आपको ऑडिट नहीं कराना, लेकिन 44AD में नहीं आएंगे। आपकी बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स के बेसिस पे आपकी इनकम जो कंप्यूट होगी वो इनकम होगी। संजय चांडक जी फिर पूछ रहे हैं, वेदर ए कंपनी कैन रिसीव 5 लाख बाई चेक एंड ऑल्सो कैश अप टू 1.5 लाख अगेंस्ट सेल ऑफ कार। शायद इनका क्वेश्चन 269 ST से संबंधित है। तो देखिए ये सिंगल ट्रांजैक्शन है, सिंगल ट्रांजैक्शन में सिंगल ट्रांजैक्शन 6.5 लाख रुपए की है, तो इसमें आप सिंगल ट्रांजैक्शन रिसीव एन अमाउंट, हाँ इसमें ले सकते हैं। जो 2 लाख रुपए से कम है तो आप 1.5 लाख रुपए कैश ले सकते हैं। दीपक अरोड़ा जी, सेल बाई ए सिंगल बिल ऑफ 3.5 लाख, पेमेंट रिसीव्ड थ्रू चेक ₹2.5 लाख, वेदर बैलेंस पेमेंट ऑफ ₹1 लाख कैन बी रिसीव्ड इन कैश, वेदर नहीं इट विल नॉट बी वायलेशन। संजय जी का प्रश्न था वैसा ही प्रश्न है ये। देन नीचे आ गए विनोद अग्रवाल साहब, पटियाला वाले मित्र होंगे हमारे। सर, कैश रिसीव्ड फॉर पर्सनल नीड्स लेस देन ₹2 लाख फ्रॉम क्लोज रिलेटिव, यस 269 देखिए लेस देन ₹2 लाख 269 ST में आप बच जाएंगे, लेकिन 269 में क्योंकि वहां लिमिट 20,000 या ऊपर की है आप उसमें फंस जाएंगे। लेकिन आप ये बता रहे हैं कि पर्सनल नीड थी, और पर्सनल नीड को यदि आप रीजनेबल कॉज में तब्दील कर देंगे, रीजनेबल कॉज में सेक्शन 273B में, तो आप पेनल्टी से बच सकते हैं। विष्णु शंकर जी पूछ रहे हैं, वेरी ट्रू सर, हाँ है, वेरी वाइडली एलाबोरेटली सर, थैंक्स। ओह ये तो मेरी तारीफ है, तारीफ तो अच्छी लगती है। अनिल फोन वन माई क्वेश्चन, अनिल वर्मा जी, अरे अनिल वर्मा जी आपका क्वेश्चन तो कुछ आया नहीं, या नीचे होगा शायद। SK माटा साहब हमारे मित्र हैं देहरादून से, हमारे बड़े प्यारे दोस्त हैं। There is disturbance. I think questions be asked in the chat box and participants should not be unmuted. Okay. तो ये सजेशन है उनका। अनिल जी, अनिल वर्मा जी होंगे। इन पार्टनरशिप a lender becomes partner by his lent amount laying with firm whether section 269 is applicable। तो एक पार्टनर जो लेंडर था, सॉरी एक लेंडर, उसके पैसे पड़े हुए थे फर्म में और वो पार्टनर बन गया, तो पार्टनरशिप फर्म हैज रिसीव्ड कैपिटल कंट्रीब्यूशन अदरवाइज देन बाय एन अकाउंट पे चेक, सो इट इज नॉट ए लोन और डिपॉजिट, सो इट इज परमिसिबल।
अजय भाई ये ना एक रेडमी करके, अजय भाई एक रेडमी करके आया हुआ, उसे अनम्यूट उसे म्यूट कर दो। रेडमी करके आया हुआ है नाम, मैं देखता हूँ। हाँ। ये बार-बार ये डिस्टर्ब कर रहा है और कोई सा नहीं डिस्टर्ब कर रहा। रेडमी करके एक वो आया हुआ है।
अच्छा, उपेंद्र भाई हमारे, उपेंद्र भट्ट जी श्रीनगर में बैठे हुए हैं, फंस गए हैं वहां पे, आया नहीं आया अभी। उपेंद्र भट्ट जी, कैन पर्सनल एसेट फॉर मोर देन 2 लाख बी मेड इन कैश ड्यूली withdrawn from bank? Can personal asset for more than 2 lakhs be made in cash? Yes, it can be made in cash. देने में कोई दिक्कत नहीं है। अच्छा, अनिल जी ने भी थैंक यू बोल दिया नेक्स्ट में। और फिर ये नीचे जरा करें, ये नीचे नहीं आ रहा मेरे से। और असेसमेंट 14, अच्छा ये तो मेरा था। अच्छा ठीक है। देन ऊपर डिस्टर्बेंस, माय व्यू चार्ट शुड बी स्पेसिफिक, हो गया। ये हो गया। यस, धर्मेंद्र जी का एक प्रश्न बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट था, हाउ पेनल्टी अंडर सेक्शन 270(11)(c बी लेवीड व्हेन देयर वाज नो असेसमेंट इन सच पीरियड, से असेसमेंट 14-15। नहीं, हम जो एग्जांपल सोमिल ने लिया था उस एग्जांपल में ऐसे था कि असेसमेंट ईयर 14-15 में सपोज 5 लाख रुपए की जीपी की एडिशन हुई, उस जीपी की एडिशन एडहॉक बेसिस पर थी, उसको हम इंटेंजिबल एडिशन कहते हैं। और उस इंटेंजिबल एडिशन पर चूंकि वो एडहॉक थी, जीपी की थी, तो कई बार ऐसा होता है कि असेसिंग ऑफिसर पेनल्टी नहीं इनिशिएट करते, ना ही लगाते हैं। अब 2020-21 का जब असेसमेंट चल रहा है और उसमें, हाँ मैं आ रहा हूं अभी सुधीर जी, 5 लाख रुपए की यदि कोई डिपॉजिट, रिसीट और इन्वेस्टमेंट पाई जाती है और एसएससी से पूछा जाता है भैया इस इन्वेस्टमेंट को एक्सप्लेन करो, एसएससी कहता है सर जो मेरी 5 लाख रुपए की जो एडिशन की थी 2014 में वो मेरे पास आज भी मौजूद है, तो इस 5 लाख की जो वहां एडिशन हुई थी उसको मान लो आप। सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने कहा हुआ है अनंतराम वीर सिंघैया में 123 ITR में कि ये एक्सप्लेनेशन चलेगा। तो ऐसे केस में 2020 के दौरान असेसिंग ऑफिसर के सामने जब एसएससी ने 14-15 की एडिशन के बेसिस पे ये इन्वेस्टमेंट जब एक्सप्लेन किया तो ये 14-15 की ये कंसील्ड इनकम बन जाती है। एक्सप्लेनेशन 2, धर्मेंद्र जी सुनिएगा, एक्सप्लेनेशन 2 टू सेक्शन 270(11)(c आप पढ़िएगा और पढ़कर आप थक जाएंगे, वो सेंटेंस खत्म नहीं होगा। उस एक्सप्लेनेशन में इसकी पेनल्टी लगेगी। तो 14-15 में एडिशन हुई थी, इंटेंजिबल एडिशन हुआ था, तो जब भी हुआ था एडिशन जब असेसमेंट हुआ होगा। अच्छा, अब संजय गुप्ता जी पूछ रहे हैं, शायद ये संजय गुप्ता जी हमारे सहारनपुर वाले हैं, कहाँ के हैं मालूम नहीं। इफ एनी एडिशन मेड इन सेक्शन 143(1)(a while processing return like EPF addition then any penalty will नहीं। देखिए इनकम टैक्स एक्ट बहुत मेहरबान है, सेक्शन 270A में जो 143(1)(a में जो एडजस्टमेंट हो गई कंप्यूटर ने करके भेज दी, उस पर तो कोई पेनल्टी है ही नहीं। वो सोमिल की आवाज बहुत आज साफ नहीं थी, डिस्टरबेंस हो रहा था इंटरनेट कनेक्शन की वजह से, उसने टच किया था। तो एनी एडजस्टमेंट, एनी एडिशन मेड अंडर सेक्शन 143(1)(a बाय द कंप्यूटर इन द रिटर्न इनकम, उस पर 270A नाम की पेनल्टी नहीं है, केवल टैक्स देना होगा और टैक्स को भी आप अपील के माध्यम से लड़ सकते हैं। प्लीज म्यूट अजय कुमार गुप्ता जी। गुड इवनिंग फॉर ऑल। व्हेन एसएससी, हाँ नेक्स्ट प्रश्न है, व्हेन एसएससी रिवाइजेस रिटर्न ड्यूरिंग असेसमेंट प्रोसीडिंग। अच्छा, ये धर्मेंद्र जी का था, हो गया। तो मैंने हाँ सुधीर भाई बताएं।
मेरी रिक्वेस्ट ये है भाई साहब, अभी जो पीछे परसों मैडम सीतारमन ने जो अमेंडमेंट करी है इनकम टैक्स में, हाँ। थोड़ा सा उन्हें ब्रीफ कर दे तो बेटर रहेगा।
नहीं, वो देखिए, वो जो उन्होंने जो चेंजेस किए हैं वो खास ऐसे नहीं है। जो असेसमेंट 30 सितंबर को खत्म हो रहे थे, हमने अभी सुधीर जी, मैंने और सोमिल ने एक आर्टिकल लिखा था लिमिटेशंस को लेके कि इनकम जैसे ही लॉकडाउन खुलेगा इतनी सारी चीजें सिर पर जमा हो जाएंगी। एसएससी के पे क्या, चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट और एडवोकेट्स के जेर पर ही होनी है और टैक्स डिपार्टमेंट के। तो उन सब बातों को ध्यान में रखते हुए उन्होंने 2-3-4 चीजों का जो उन्होंने रिलैक्सेशन किया है, प्रोसीजरल ज्यादा है, सब्सटेंटिव कम है। एक तो उन्होंने जो रिटर्न की डेट्स थी वो 30 सितंबर कर दी हैं। ऑडिटर्स, जैसा कि अजय गुप्ता जी बता रहे थे, ऑडिटर्स टैक्स ऑडिट करने की जो डेट है उन्होंने 31 अक्टूबर रख दी है। असेसमेंट के जो टाइम बारिंग 30 सितंबर को हो रहे थे वो आगे के लिए किए हैं, दिसंबर के लिए किए हैं। और जो मार्च में जो टाइम बारिंग हो रहे थे 21 में, वो 1 साल के लिए मार्च 22 के लिए कर दिए हैं। टीडीएस जहां कटना था सैलरीड एम्प्लॉइज के अलावा, वहां उन्होंने 75, आपकी हमारी इनकम पर 10% टीडीएस कटता है, अब क्लाइंट 7.5% काटेगा। लेकिन साहब क्लाइंट 10% काट लेता है तो बड़ा सुकून रहता है, क्योंकि वो एडवांस टैक्स फिर हमको या टैक्स हमको ज्यादा नहीं जमा कराना पड़ता। लेकिन चलो अब उन्होंने कर दिया है, और इसको भी यदि 20 लाख करोड़ के पैकेज में इंक्लूड कर लिया है तो हाँ। उनको साधुवाद, तो उनको
हम विवाद से विश्वास में भी
इसको भी उन्होंने 31 दिसंबर तक इसको कर दिया है। 36 दिसंबर तक आप यदि टैक्स पे कर देंगे तो उस पर आपको एडिशनल जो है वो नहीं देना पड़ेगा
मेरे ख्याल से।
लेकिन आप इस तो
एक 20 लाख करोड़,
20 लाख करोड़ में इंक्लूड है ये सब।
अजय जी कुछ कह रहे हैं,
ये 20 लाख करोड़ के पैकेज में तो गवर्नमेंट ने जो एसएससीज का रिफंड है वो भी कर लिया।
देखो साहब, ये इसको 20 लाख का पैकेज नहीं, 20 लाख करोड़ का पैकेज नहीं बोलेंगे। देखिए, सरकार के पास बहुत ज्यादा एल्बो रूम नहीं है। आप ये लगाइए अजय जी और सुधीर भाई, हमारे साल का जो बजट होता है ना सरकार का, वो 30 लाख करोड़ का होता है अप्रोक्सीमेटली। उस 30 लाख करोड़, एक साल का बजट पूरा 30 लाख करोड़ का होता है। उस 30 लाख करोड़ में से डायरेक्ट और इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स करीब 23-24 लाख करोड़ होते हैं, और वही पूरे नहीं पड़ते। उसके लिए डेफिसिट फाइनेंसिंग बढ़ाने की बात हो रही थी। तो अब तो ये सिर पे ऐसी आपदा आ पड़ी, तो इसलिए 20 लाख करोड़ एक इसको उस तरह से ना लें। मैं तो ये कहता हूं 20 लाख करोड़ चलो आप दे रहे हैं, जैसे भी दे रहे हैं वैसे दे रहे हैं। हमारे इनकम टैक्स एक्ट में ही कुछ 2-3 चीजें संशोधित कर दें। आप कम से कम 115 बीबी को ही वापस 30% पे ले आए बिना किसी पेनल्टी के। लोग अपने आप इस कैश क्रंच के जमाने में भी, जो बिजनेसमैन बैंक में जमा करा के 30% टैक्स दे के बिजनेस चलाएं, उसी से बहुत आराम मिलेगा। लेकिन अब क्या बताएं, जब इसको 78% किया गया था, ये 78 जो किया गया था वो डिमोनेटाइजेशन के लिए किया गया था। अब डिमोनेटाइजेशन भी चला गया, कम से कम इसको तो वापस लाएं।
एक क्वेश्चन और था भाई साहब, ये पीछे अभी था एक सर्कुलर 148 के जो नोटिस थे, उन्होंने विड्रॉ, सारे नोटिस विड्रॉ कर दिए हैं। तो जो मार्च में नोटिस इशू होने थे वो क्या नोटिस इशू होने हैं क्या, उसके बारे में?
मेरे हिसाब से 148 के नोटिस विड्रॉ होने का कोई बात नहीं थी। ये था कि स्क्रूटनी नोटिस अभी जारी नहीं करेंगे, ठीक है ना। तो 148 जो 30 मार्च तक दिए जा सकते थे, ये अभी ऑर्डिनेंस के हिसाब से 30 जून तक उनको दे सकते हैं।
तो अभी क्लैरिफाई नहीं है वेदर दे, मतलब वो नोटिस इशू होंगे या नहीं होंगे?
नहीं, वो क्लैरिफिकेशन इतना मान लो कि वो होंगे, वो नहीं छोड़ेंगे।
मतलब 20 लाख करोड़, वो 20 लाख करोड़ वो इंक्लूड नहीं होते
ना ना, वो किसी भी लाख में, क्योंकि देखो वो साल होंगे 13-14 के, असेसमेंट ईयर 13-14, और 13-14 में जहां एसएससीज ने जो खेल खेले हुए होंगे, उसके आधार पर वो कोविड-19 का फायदा लेना चाहें तो वो भी जस्टिफाइड नहीं है सुधीर जी। अब हम सभी लोग इतने इवॉल्व कर गए हैं कि जो गलत है सो गलत है। वी विल हैव टू कॉल ए स्पेड, ठीक है ना। हाँ ठीक है, हम भी बड़े उत्साही थे अपने यौवन में, तो हम भी साहब आउट ऑफ द वे जाके हम बात किया करते थे, लेकिन ऐसी नहीं, जो चीज जो है, जो सच और सही है वो सच और सही है।
थैंक यू अजय भाई।
क्वेश्चन कंक्लूड किया जाए सर। मैं हृदय से कृतज्ञता प्रकट करना चाहूंगा अपने दोनों स्पीकर्स के प्रति, आदरणीय श्री राकेश गुप्ता जी एवं सौमिल अग्रवाल के प्रति, समस्त स्टडी सर्कल के मेंबर्स की ओर से, और बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद देना चाहूंगा कि अपना बहुमूल्य समय उन्होंने हमारे ज्ञानवर्धन के लिए यहाँ पर दिया। और इससे पहले कि मैं सुधीर जी को रिक्वेस्ट करूं कि वो उसको कंक्लूड कराएं, मैं अपनी जो है शुभकामनाएं देना चाहूंगा। श्री मनीष गुप्ता जो हमारे डिप्टी कन्वीनर हैं, आज उनकी भी मैरिज एनिवर्सरी है।
अरे वाह वाह,
बहुत बहुत बधाइयां। और मैं सुधीर जी से रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि वे सबको धन्यवाद दें।
नहीं, आज की टी पार्टी इसका मतलब मनीष गुप्ता की तरफ से रही। आज की जो टी पार्टी है वो मनीष गुप्ता जी की तरफ से रही ना फिर। तो विद द थैंक्स, मैं भाई साहब का बहुत आभारी, जो भाई साहब छोटी सी रिक्वेस्ट पर हमारा मान लेते हैं। आई एम थैंकफुल टू सोमिल ऑल्सो। हमारे मतलब फोर्थ कमिंग ये स्टार्स हैं, आने वाले टाइम में हमारा भाई साहब को कहेंगे भाई साहब आप तो थोड़ा सा, भाई साहब ऐसे 60 की तरफ चल रहे हैं अब तो, धीरे धीरे सीनियर सिटीजन की तरफ चल रहे हैं। तो अब सोमिली विल टेक केयर द थिंग। आई एम थैंकफुल टू बोथ द स्पीकर, और सबको इनवाइट करता हूँ एक अपने अपने घर पर चाय के लिए, सब अपने अपने घर पर। थैंक यू सर।
नमस्कार।
थैंक यू सर।
थैंक यू।
बहुत बहुत
नाउ
मनीष जी कहाँ चले गए?
मनीष जी चाय का अरेंजमेंट करने गए।
अच्छा, तो मैं एंड करता हूँ मीटिंग।
हाँ एंड कर दो या प्लीज क्लोज द मीटिंग।
ठीक है सर।